And now with Magnus just winning, he looks at the screen to know how many moves have been done. 50 moves, so it's 1 second increment per move. And now he's coming from here. Also, the king is in trouble. If you give a check, it's almost mate. So rook a2, rook c1. And the knight jumps to f2. Nice move. Bishop b3, rook b2 played. He takes the pawn, but now finally the rook gets from behind. Here g4 check, and he resigns. King g3 is met with knight e4, and you lose the rook. Magnus Carlsen score. Grandmaster Fabiano Caruana is going to take on Magnus Carlsen in the Armageddon here. Fabi's here, Magnus arrives, and you know, Magnus and Fabi's battles have been legendary. In fact, in a recent one of the podcasts of Botes sisters, Magnus was asked to reveal who's the player at the top that he likes the most. And of course, these top players are not friendly with each other because they have to compete. But for Magnus, maybe if there was someone whom he felt close to, it was Fabiano Caruana. And now they are fighting against each other at the 5th round of Norway chess. We have e4, e5, knight f3, knight to c6. Magnus just needs a draw. He has 7 minutes on the clock. Caruana has 10. Bishop comes to c5. You can see the Italian game, the main line has been played, and it'll be interesting to see if Magnus remembers all the intricacies of this line. Has he prepped it? Will he go for something which is not particularly sharp? Let's see. d6, bishop g5, and there you see Fabi clearing his intentions. He's like, I'm going for the sharpest line. h6, bishop h4, and Magnus makes a luft for the bishop to go back. a4 played, trying to gain space on the queen side with b4 and so on. And now Magnus brings his bishop back to a7, still not deciding whether he would like to castle or not. He plays his queen to e7, and Caruana pushes his pawn to b4. At some point, Magnus, knight d8. I was saying at some point he has to decide whether to castle or not, but he goes knight d8. Fabi castles, and maybe he wants to put his knight on e6. Interesting maneuver here by Magnus. Generally, we see knight e7 to knight g6 maneuvers. d4 by Fabi. Now, this is a big surprise for me because it's straight away losing a pawn here, right? But Magnus goes knight to f4. I think Magnus didn't want to get into this thing of taking the pawn. Rook e1 played by Fabi. And now bishop g4. White's position is interesting here. Wonder what Fabi will do next. He brings his knight to f1. Maybe to get to e3. But here, knight g6 attacking the bishop. The bishop comes back, putting additional pressure on e5. Bishop takes f3, hitting the queen here. And now pawn takes is a decent move. You can also take with the queen. Fabi decides to take with the queen and gambit the pawn in the center. Very risky decision with the king in the center, queen here. e5 must be calculated because this is hanging. But Magnus is confident. He takes. Rook comes to d1. And now very careful here. Magnus finds the best move, attacking the queen. The queen goes to b3. And the bishop drops back. If Fabi cannot prove, f4 would be lovely, but the pawn is pinned. He needs to get f4, e5. Knight e3 played. He's coming to f5 with his knight. And Magnus thinks it's the best to chop off that knight. Rook takes, and now just get the king out from the center. I believe he can even take the bishop. It's a tough call between the two. He goes knight h5. This is very ambitious, and now taking here would be great. If queen e5, there's bishop f7. If pawn takes, rook d3. If castles, rook d7. White is better, clearly better. So a big opportunity here for Fabi to take on e5. You see him calculating. Magnus has 4 minutes, and Fabi needs to take a call. He goes bishop e2 after a long thing, but it's a bad move. It allows Magnus to kind of stabilize the position. And finally, Carlsen castles here. f4 is played, knight jumps back to d7. White definitely has compensation. That goes without saying. You have space, you have pieces on great squares, but Magnus's beautiful move here to get the c5 square for his knight, queen c2, and suddenly you can see like black is stabilizing, you know. He gets his rook to d8, he will put his pawn on b6, and then he'll try to figure it out. 27 moves done here, 13 more moves. Until then, the players don't get any increment, then 1 second increment. c6, I'm very surprised by Magnus's decision to push this pawn instead of b6. He is trying to create play. He doesn't want the position to be locked in, which is why he plays this. But now these pawns are all a bit loose. Queen a7 played here, pinning the rook to the king. And now king comes up to h2. Yeah, are there any good discovery attacks here? He takes the pawn and the rook is hanging. Rook a3, he comes back with his knight. Now 2 pawns up for Magnus. Shall we push our pawn here in the center? But then the knight jumps back to e6. It's not easy. It's not easy for Caruana to find compensation. He pins the knight here and maybe now threatens e5. Magnus goes rook d7. 2 minutes 27 seconds for both players. And they have hit 33rd move. Now e5. Definitely a good move. But a blunder here. He blunders the central pawn. Fabiano, what a big mistake by him. You generally don't see Fabi blundering. But I believe it's also the tiredness. And now it's 3 pawns down. And that's a bit too much. Bit too much. The rook is saved. Takes 1 pawn. Queen jumps in. Magnus is attacking the g3 pawn. And he goes queen a3 takes. Rook takes a3. And of course Magnus is going to win this now with his 2 extra pawns. Bishop comes back. Just simply going back with the knight makes a lot of sense. 2 minutes 10 seconds for Magnus. He goes f5, which also seems like a good idea. Maybe Fabi can get some play with g4. He goes rook a6, attacking the pawn here. Maybe pushing it to c5. Well, rook f6 played. And now he gives a check, king at 7. And Fabi is thinking in tricks now. He goes rook d8 with the idea of rook takes d5. The rook is hanging. The best move is rook f7, defending the rook. That should be completely fine. But will he play it? Magnus takes a piece. Rook d6 blunders. Blunders big time. You don't see Magnus blundering like this. Take, and bishop d5. He pushes his pawn to c5. Magnus, no expressions there. Maybe he just wanted to give up the pawn to clarify the situation. It's not a blunder. Got it. A draw is fine for Magnus. So he just simplified it. That's interesting actually. Bishop c2 and his advantage is back now. Magnus, I don't think is going to let this slide now. Rook d4. He just c3. He goes h5, stopping white from going g4 to destabilize the knight. c3 played here. And now with Magnus just winning, he looks at the screen to know how many moves have been done. 50 moves, so it's 1 second increment per move. And now he's coming from here. Also, the king is in trouble. If you give a check, it's almost mate. So rook a2, rook c1. And the knight jumps to f2. Nice move. Bishop b3, rook b2 played. He takes the pawn, but now finally the rook gets from behind. Here g4 check and he resigns. King g3 is met with knight e4 and you lose the rook. Magnus Carlsen scores the win. He keeps his lead in this tournament. He had 8 points before this round. Now 9.5. He's doing amazingly well. And in spite of not playing a lot of standard classical chess, Magnus shows that his preparation, his play, and everything is still the best